Hello, I'm Mackenzie, and my group is going to debate um, whether or not individuals with disabilities should be given the right to decide on what comes after their IEPs, or if their parents should decide what happens after their IEPs. I'm going to be introducing everybody as well as giving kind of a background of some laws that are in place to help these individuals. Brittany Hampton will be debating for the care side, and Carrie Cole and Samantha Coleman will be debating for the empowerment side. Um, as you can see in our visual, there are four different laws that we kind of focused on. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Education of All Handicapped Children's Act of 1975, and the Vocational Education Act amendments in 1967 and 1968, as well as Individuals with Disability Acts of 1997. I'm only going to focus on the IDEA Act just because it's a little bit more current than the other ones. So the IDEA Act of 1997 states that every person should have effective policies and procedures provided with appropriate free public education. So what does this mean for kiddos who go to private schools? Part B was in to protect those who have whose parents decide that they want to go to private schooling. However, it does not require the schools at this time to follow the same standards of the public school. The act was then amended in 1999, which focused on the rights of children in private schools. In regards to transition, the IDEA Act focuses on the IEP, and it helps them transition from kind of that post-secondary school, it transitions from school to adult life. Currently, the IDEA Act requires that they write in transition services when the children turn 16. And you can also look at the articles that I published or put in the bottom of the visual to kind of look further on those goals or those laws. So if Carrie and Brittany want to take over on the first topic.
I think that's actually going to be me. So the first thing that we're going to kind of go into on the empowerment side, which would be the students having their own rights and making their own decisions for themselves, would be their ability to live alone after school, after high school, into the transition into adult life. So currently in the United States, the wait list for home placements is getting longer, and the more adults waiting for in-home services or services that would provide limited support or independent living is growing. There is a lack of services that take on the challenges of individuals with disabilities, and some of those challenges, is their skills in executive functioning, difficulties dealing with new situations, processing complex information, as well as problem-solving skills, which are all needed skills in living independently. Research has identified interventions that improve independence in home environments. These interventions have focused on increasing self-help skills, reducing inappropriate behaviors, and increasing participants in daily living activities. However, there's just not enough services to go around for the need of people.
Kind of to piggyback on what Samantha said, my daughter is going through the ITP process. She's 15. sophomore in high school. She has ASD. Sorry, and we just went through her IEP process. And one thing that we've been talking about is getting her ready for her transitioning and getting her ready for post-secondary, and like what her goals are, what her diploma is, what we're aiming for, what her goals are. But one of the things that we keep talking about in her IEP, and I have to remember this, is in high school, their job isn't actually for them to get ready for adulthood. Their job is to get them ready to graduate from high school. And so it's kind of up to me as the parent stepping in and going, okay, these are the things that I want to see happen or that we're going to need help with so that she can get these transitioning, getting these executive functioning down, getting all these other issues down. And I think that's something a lot of people forget about. So just to kind of, that's where a lot of kids in high school, in regular gen ed high schools, are dealing with, is their teachers are getting them ready for graduating high school. Not necessarily college, which that sounds funny, but their job is to get them to graduate. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
And I think to kind of piggyback off of what Carrie said, we talk a little bit about transition services, and actually we found some research that showed that 67.4% of youth with autism spectrum disorders do not attend their transition planning meetings, or they attend with minimal participation, and only 2.6% of individuals actually state that they lead the planning services. So this proportion of individuals who are not participating to individuals who are is extremely off-kilter, especially by the laws that are required for transition services. Many of these transition services are kind of cause conflict between parents and the staff that are on the meetings. Professionals that are participants are on the IEP teams perceive parents as coming between themselves and the young adults, and parents perceive the professionals as having too much influence and control, which can impose on their standards or family values. Young adults with disabilities either function side by side in the meetings, or they're left out completely in the process. The studies have also identified some differences between service providers and parents concerning both the level and type of provider involvement, which suggests a need for healthcare providers and parents to have a more open discussion about transition planning, starting with students' housing arrangements, which then brings us back to living arrangements.
One quick thing, because of doing this debate topic, when we were preparing my daughter for her IEP and I read about most of them not leading their IEP meeting, I immediately got on the emailed her teacher of record and said, she's leading the IEP meeting. My daughter wasn't real happy with that, but when we had it, I asked her how she felt. She felt she knew more of what was going on, and she felt better about this IEP meeting than she has in the past, even though she's always participated. But because she had to lead it, and I said, because we came to the conclusion that this is your life, it's not ours, it helped a lot.
Okay, so I'm just going to add a little bit as far as IEP meetings and making sure that they are led by the individual. That's actually something that we're starting to see a lot more of in the adult world. You know, I work with a lot of Medicaid waivers and adults who are on Medicaid waivers, so we do see a lot of person-centered planning, and actually Medicaid is making it a law to where all of their plans are person-centered from now on, so that they revolve around those persons' wants and needs and not necessarily around what we as providers or caregivers think are best.
So I'm going to go ahead and kind of give like a personal experience kind of for the care side. We have an adult day program at our center who kind of cater to lower functioning adults. And in those situations, they find it really hard because those adults cannot lead their IEP meetings when they start turning 16. So in this situation, like it's kind of unfortunate that they don't get to have more input on what their lives get to look like after their IEPs and schooling are done. And in this situation, it's really important that the parents do their research and kind of know their kid and kind of help them make that decision because they're not able to do it on their own. So, for example, I have a kiddo who carries around a Snow White doll, and she's 22 years old. I mean, it's just not appropriate for her to be making those decisions. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good example of someone who's not able to kind of conduct their IEP meetings.
So a little bit more about, Brittany, did you want to go?
Just to go off of what Mackenzie was saying, you know, I definitely agree with her that there's going to be situations, especially based off of your cognitive or intellectual ability, where you can't be the main presenter for your IEP meeting or for your transition planning or any planning after the age of 18. And I think that what's really important for parents to consider in that situation is the big picture overall, because you know, a lot of parents aren't aware that when their child turns 18, regardless of their mental capacity, that they are their own guardian. So, you know, just knowing the legalities of that and figuring out that you're going to have to start that court process early in order to even become their guardian is a long process, and many parents are unaware of those steps that they have to take. So I think just a little bit more, you know, push from the school district to help parents and lead them in that way would be helpful, especially for those, you know, those individuals who can't make those decisions.
And we also found that a lot of parents are actually aware of what their child needs. They might not be aware of the steps that it takes to get there, but they know what they want. And there's kind of a discrepancy between what parents feel their children need and what professionals think their children need. We found that parents are more focused on their children's strengths and capitalizing on their capabilities and their personality traits and their accomplishments, whereas transition teams or the professionals involved tend to be more focused on their disabilities and what they're not capable of doing. And I think this often leaves the kids kind of out or feeling a little bit more uneasy about what's going to happen in the future. When asked, young adults with disabilities often have, they're often able to articulate what their post-graduation goals are and what they expect from the adult life. Although some of them are a little bit more apprehensive because they're facing the unknown, which, I mean, we all are, but they're excited about becoming an adult and being an active member of society. But the most dominant dominant topic of conversation in these discussions with them about their transition services often tend to be work and contributing to society and what are they going to do their part. But despite all this excitement and this willingness to contribute, the Department of Labor actually estimates that in 2011, only 27% of adults with disabilities between the ages of 16 and 64 were employed, whereas 70% of adults with disabilities were not, or 70% of adults without disabilities were employed. So we're still seeing a huge gap in the employment rates between youth with disabilities and youth without disabilities as far as employment. Now, this employment shouldn't be taken as a lack of work ethic or a lack of ability to do the work, because there are many programs that provide services to assist these children Many of the employers tend to work in a sheltered employment or voluntary job, or the individuals with disabilities tend to work in a sheltered job or voluntary job, whereas they would like to have a job with pay. However, many of the employers don't provide accommodations for these students. This is an ongoing problem in the United States with the individuals with disabilities not being as employed as others, and there's actually some strategies that you can do to improve this. Employers that work with these accommodations find higher rates of satisfaction with their employees. These strategies often include allowing the employee or the individual with disabilities to have choices, using assessments to determine task preferences, evaluating social and communication needs, and adding necessary modifications and adaptations. Using these interventions, youth with disabilities can definitely be employed.
Say right now, kind of going with that, my daughter, her goal is to get a summertime job. She wants to learn how to be in the real world. And talking at the school and talking through her IEP and ITP meeting, it was come to the conclusion that if she has a job coach, which they have at the school, they can work with different companies here in the area to let them know that, hey, she has special needs, she's looking for transitioning in vocational habilitation, so that they can kind of move her up into the hiring position, and they give her, I don't want to say more leeway, but more understanding, where with a child without a disability, if they had the same position, there wouldn't be as much leeway. It's more of a, not necessarily sheltered, but a little bit more of a customizable vocation, as they're going to work with her issues so that she can work and earn money. So that's kind of where I'm at with that, and I thought that was just a good idea, because a lot of kids that I have gotten fired because they don't disclose their disability, or because of their disability they feel that they're getting fired because they can't live up to the expectations that the company has.
So kind of going off of what Carrie had said, we actually, in that adult day program, we have some of the instructors go out into the community and work with some of the local businesses that are close to the center, and they take the students like once or twice a week to kind of work with these employers and hopefully get them to be hired long term. We also had another student's brother who was older and wasn't looking for what our day program kind of offered, and he came in with a life coach or somebody to help him, and he was able to do our janitorial work, and it kind of helped out because we were all familiar with autism, whereas some employers aren't. So having a really good coach kind of helps as well, and parents trying to find a good coach for their children and who help fit their needs as well.
It's actually funny that you guys are all talking about job coaches and the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, because that's actually, that would really go towards the care side, because the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, they are there to help people with disabilities find employment. And what they do is, once a person wants to find employment, they're sent a referral to the Voc Rehab Center. And then they meet with a case manager, and that case manager does those assessments that you guys were talking about to go through and find out what their best skills would be, what would be a good placement for them. And then they help to match them with certain companies that would be able to help provide employment or provide them job coaching. So what you guys are actually describing is a side of care, because we're providing those supports that those people need in order to maintain employment. And what's actually really great about that is there's a company here in Colorado actually that they have a coffee shop, and at that coffee shop they only employ people with disabilities. And on the other side, they also have their own little bakery, and they make jams and things like that. So they make all of those things there. All the people with disabilities make that, and then they sell it, and they work there. So it is giving them a lot of support, and it's not necessarily saying that care is a bad thing, but we want to be able to to set up that support in a way that's going to make an individual successful.
I think a lot of times too, individuals with disabilities are kind of viewed as like a economic liability to the public, but that assumption's not correct. This also kind of goes into the medical aspect of independence for the empowerment side. A lot of individuals have the capabilities of being their own guardian or being their making their own decisions, but a lot of medical facilities don't actually give them room to, or give them the accommodations they need to make those medical decisions. Initially, a parent's goal for young adults is to include them and make them feel like they have a sense of fulfillment using their talents and skills and abilities to contribute to the greater society, but also to keep themselves safe from harm. Parents and children don't always agree on how to achieve these objectives. Parents sought children's input in planning future goals, but especially when it came to medical decisions, but that was only when they could. In these conversations, the parents and professionals and the children, actually, they're individuals with disabilities, often discussed how they would finally be able to make their own decisions and achieve adult status. So this is a main area of conversation in these areas of transition services. There are actually some interventions that the Maternal and Child Health Bureau and the American Academy of Pediatrics have used to heighten awareness. These transition services tend to emphasize appointment making, maneuvering around health clinics, practice, the medical terms, that sort of thing. And they do this by allowing the patients or the individuals with disabilities to call and set up their own appointments, or set up what they call a pre-appointment visit between the individual and their doctors. This actually allows them to foster a sense of comfort and familiarity before kind of jumping into the medical practice, because difficulty with change, as we know, is generally a symptom of some of the disabilities. So these transition services for medicals kind of help the individuals with disabilities move more smoothly through the healthcare system, and it gives them a broader sense, or a greater sense of independence, which I think is really important to foster.
With the idea of being more independent with the doctors and with their medical history, one thing I've noticed when I take my daughter in, granted she's still a minor, the doctors always turn and they immediately start talking to me. They don't talk to her. To where when I go in, I have to sit there and tell her, or I tell the doctors, talk to her. I can add things in, but I want you speaking to her so she gets what's going on and she knows that, because it is about her that we're talking about. So that's one thing, and I think a lot of times parents forget that, especially as they become these teenagers. You still want to take care of them because you still worry about them. You worry, the worry I have every day about, the decisions she's making and stuff is huge. But I know I also have to push for her to have that independence and to make others accountable for her to be independent. And I mean, with the medical field, that's one thing, is having the doctors talk to her and not talk to me.
And I think to add to that, with a little bit is, when we're saying care side, there are individuals who are hired to go in and be advocates for individuals when they go to the doctor's office. And that's just to make sure that they understand what they're signing, they make sure that they understand their diagnosis. If they have any questions, that the doctor can be there answering them while their advocate is there with them as well. So again, it's not to say that care is necessarily a bad thing, it's just to put those extra supports in place. And I know one thing that I see a lot of and it kind of goes along the lines of the medical field, are parents' concerns about mistreatment, abuse, neglect, or what we used to call MAME. So a lot of times, for adults who have a lower cognitive ability, parents are really concerned that when they leave the home or they're going out with their friends at an older age that, you know, they're going to be really susceptible to that. So that's definitely a concern.
I actually in the healthcare field, and I deal a lot with competency testings, and I think this is a really important aspect to point out on this care versus empowerment side for the medical aspect, because a lot of times I see individuals who come in who it's assumed that they need a power of attorney, it's assumed they need a guardian, and it's not always clear what they're capable of doing. So what I do is I do neuropsychological testing, so I do IQ, memory, comprehension, attention, and a lot of times we see that, especially the younger individuals with disabilities that we see, this has really, their abilities are really underestimated. A lot of times these individuals are capable of doing a lot more than we expect or that we think they can do, and I actually had a case this week where they came in for competency testings, and we actually determined that they were competent to make their own decisions and be their own power of attorney, which did not always make the family happy because the family didn't think they could do it, but sometimes these kids can do it, and I think a thorough evaluation of what their needs are and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and it kind of sets it all out, gives you a clear picture of what they can and can't do, especially in the medical world where, I mean, doctor's appointments are scary for everyone. You know, you never know what you're going to have, or you never know who you're going to see, and I think knowing that they're able to comprehend what they're being told, or they're able to pay attention long enough to sit through the whole meeting, or they're comfortable enough with strangers, kind of adds to a parent's self-assurance of their child being able to do this, whereas a lot of times we doubt it. So I think that's kind of a good thing to emphasize, that there are resources out there to determine if the child is able to make their own decisions in the medical field.
And just to go off of what you were saying about guardianship, I think there's just this huge misconception about what a guardian actually can do. Often, you know, working with the adults, often we hear a lot of times that the guardian gets to make all the decisions, and that is completely incorrect. A guardian is appointed to help oversee the decisions that they make, but that person is still their own individual. And, you know, I see this so often when a guardian or a young adult is living with a parent, and the parent is the guardian, and they want to control everything that young adult is doing. Like if the young adult smokes or drinks or something like that, the guardian will be like, no, well, I'm your guardian, you're not going to do that. And, you know, I think that what really needs to be understood is that they're still their own person, they still have rights, and like in my state, there's actually a board for my county that's set up, and they actually investigate for any rights restrictions. So if it's not legally put in place, then they could face charges.
So I'm just kind of wrap up. I think we give you a lot of information about both empowerment and care when it comes to living, medical, and financial decisions. It's a very fine line. There might be a kiddo who is extremely high functioning and can make their own living decisions, but might need, you know, help from a guardian making medical decisions. I think we all kind of gave you a good picture of what it may look like in the real world with some of our stories, and we hope you guys enjoyed our presentation.